studying a degree in mental health nursing, and I've got an exam coming up on Thursday. So one of the exam questions is sociological perspectives and social construction theory in mental health. And I didn't have a clue about it when we got told we had to have this in the exam. So it was YouTube, finding videos on YouTube that helped me understand it. So I thought, I've done all my research, I've done YouTube, I've checked the original articles, original journals, videos, PowerPoints, I've done everything, and I've combined it all into this one little presentation that I'm going to give to you in the video now. Just in case there's someone else in the future that doesn't have a frigging clue about social construct. By the end of this video you'll know what you're talking about. And social construction refers to the way we create meaning through social interactions with others. It is not based on any inherent quality. It surrounds the belief that assumptions are made by society based on reality, knowledge and learning. Social constructs are the byproducts of countless human choices rather than the law. Social construction is an ongoing process that depends on people acting on interpretations and their knowledge of it. These need to be constantly maintained and reaffirmed in order to persist. For example, jokes, cartoons and the media all create social constructions. Hacking believes society takes social constructs for granted, and he believes social constructs are inevitable. For example, we all connect the American flag to America, but there's no little voice coming from the flag saying, "Oh, I represent America." We just know because a big group of people have agreed on it, so it's now socially constructed that the American flag represents America. Just like in England you have bacon, eggs and sausages for breakfast, no one said that's the law, sausage and eggs and bacon are for breakfast. We've just agreed, like it's a common consensus that that is an English breakfast. Now if you went over to China, they have vegetable soup for breakfast, and they'd be shocked at our sausage and eggs. So culture also plays a huge part in social constructs. These meanings do not come out of nowhere. They are from people making claims as to what something means, yeah? So they're usually from one person saying something, and then loads of people get on the bandwagon, and then all of a sudden it's a social construct. By socially constructing people, we create categories and ideas about what people are like. For example, the mentally ill. When society thinks about the mentally ill, it's based on delusions which are powerful and misleading. The media doesn't help in here at all. This leads to stereotypes being formed. As I will explain later, labelling and stereotyping can have both a positive and a negative effect on the mentally ill. In the past, people that deviate from normal behaviour were said to be possessed, or demons, or witches, or, you know, that's karma, when really they were just mentally ill. That was our way of like coping with something that deviated from the norm back then. And this is the way people hundreds of years ago coped with something that they thought was frightening or threatening. The social construct was used because it helped make people feel secure. Yeah? This construct reinforced the notion that if people were not mentally ill, they spent their lives making the right and the safe choices. So it created like an us and them culture. Social constructs have been used as security blankets over the years, but as technology has advanced and our understanding of mental health has increased, we have learned that the mentally ill are not witches, and they're not demons, and it's not fate, and they haven't been evil in a past life. Yeah? As mental health nurses, we can say we are not discriminatory against the mentally ill, but that does not erase the consequences of the social construction surrounding mental illness. The social construct itself needs to change. This means the majority of people also need to not be discriminatory against the mentally ill. As difficult as this sounds, it can be achieved. An example of this would be the feminist movement of the 20th century, or abolishing racism in the late 50s, early 60s. In these days, in a time where social networks and celebrities are worshipped, social constructs should potentially be easier to demolish. Celebrities such as Stephen Fry are speaking out about their mental illness, and this is helping to make it more acceptable. The social construct surrounding mental illness is slowly changing. Even though social constructions are made of thin air, they matter. This is because they are the widely accepted belief from the majority of people. The fact that a large amount of people agree with something means it has been successfully socially constructed. Once successfully constructed, it is difficult to change. They are powerful. To change one would be a continuing struggle. Assumptions are near on impossible to overcome due to social conditioning. The effects of social construct are so severe, the stigma surrounding mental illness is a major contributor to suicide. Studies have shown that 50% of people with bipolar will try to kill themselves at some point. There are reasons why we behave the way we do as a society. Social conditioning helps serve the purpose of social control. It is used by the majority to manipulate and exploit individuals. It creates a them and us culture. Until the mid-20th century, many people who had behaviour that deviated from the norm, and this is only like 50, 60 years ago, they were classified as mentally ill. And a prime example of this would be homosexuals. Schatz said we label people mad if we don't like their behaviour, or if we disagree with their opinions. Society uses mental health as a tool of power to gain status over people. An example of this would be putting people into institutions without their consent. By restricting the mentally ill this way, we are encouraging the potential to make them even more mentally ill. There are three perspectives used in social construction theory. The first one is the conflict perspective, and this focuses on how the mentally ill is associated with economic and social inequality in society. The theory believes that mental health is real, but society affects it greatly. Fryer, in 1995, showed a correlation between unemployment, which led to low income and more stress, and mental illness. There is an inequality of wealth and power in Western society. This may limit a person's access to effective treatment. Studies have shown mental illness is higher from those from a lower socio-economic status. So that basically means people from the poorer neighbourhoods, they're more susceptible to being mentally ill. There are two opposing hypotheses behind this. First of all, you have the social stress hypothesis, which attempts to explain this correlation by claiming poverty leads to stress, and it is the stress that contributes to the mental illness. And then you have the drift hypothesis, which is the reverse, and it claims that it's the mental illness that eventually leads the individual to drift into poverty. The second perspective is functionalist perspective, and this focuses on how mental illness changes our ability to provide effective treatment. You can have non-medical treatment, such as therapy, talking one-to-one time, or you can have medical treatment, such as ECT and other operations on your brain and stuff, and medication. Recent studies show that the lack of treatment is one of the most persistent social problems associated with mental illness. Most patients with mental disorders are not receiving treatment despite an increase in the rate of treatments. To address this problem, a variety of institutions and approaches need to work together. Until recently, mental health care meant being committed into a hospital. However, Rosenhan placed pseudo patients into a mental health hospital, and the staff, they put 8 patients in there basically, and they said to the patients they needed to tell the doctor they were hearing voices that said FUD. Nothing else. They were supposed to act normal, but they needed to tell the doctors they could hear a voice in their head saying FUD. The doctor admitted all 8 of the patients, the pretend patients. Anyway, 7 of them got diagnosed with schizophrenia, and 1 of them got diagnosed with bipolar. And then the staff couldn't differentiate between the sane patients and the insane patients. This argues the validity of psychiatric diagnosis. This demonstrated the danger of labelling the mentally ill, at risk of dehumanising them. It was from this study that the suggestion of community health teams was formed, and the community health teams could be used to focus on the problems rather than the label. So that basically means community health teams could focus on the person rather than the label of mentally ill, schizophrenic, depressed. Do you know what I mean? They'd focus on the person rather than the diagnosis. Community care is also cheaper than asylums. So hopefully, eventually, we're moving towards the whole community care basis and we're coming away from the asylums and the hospitals. The third perspective is the interactionalist perspective, which focuses on social construction of mental illness and how the definitions of normal and deviant behaviour in social situations leads to a definition of mental illness. Western society has classified mental illness into 3 categories. Yeah? You can have medical mental illness, deviant mental illness, and a problem with living. Yeah, so it's the myth of mental illness, the last one, and I'm going to explain all of these. In the medical model, mental illness is seen as a disease which has biological causes, yeah? Like, it ignores the role of the environment as a possible factor completely. Like, it's not the environment, it's not the way you've been brought up. You were born to have mental ill problems. An example of this would be schizophrenia. Like, they think schizophrenia is based on misfiring synapses going on in your brain. The second model is deviance model. And this is a way to explain mental illness as a departure from social expectations within society. For example, Chef explains that society labels and defines a behaviour, person or condition as mental illness if it deviates from the norm. Once a person is labelled, it is difficult to change people's opinions of them. Then there is the problem with living model, and this is basically from a guy called Saz, and he just believes all mental health, like, it's just a myth, like, mental health does not exist, yeah? He claims it stems from unresolved conflicts and problems with living. He claims mental health illness is not a physical object. It can only exist the way other theoretical concepts exist, such as time and space. So, for example, we know there's time, but we can't prove it. You know, like, we know we have a mind, but unless you think it's part of the brain, we can't prove that we have a mind, even though we think. There's no proof of it, and this is what Saz is saying. Saz believes it has become a habit to believe in mental illness. Mental illness, he believes, is in fact a problem with living within the biological, economic, political and socio-psychological world around us. There are many other social constructs that negatively influence the perception of mental health, yeah? And these include your race, sex and age. Chelsea found that women who depart from traditional roles, such as staying at home, looking after the kids, cooking the dinner, are more likely to be defined as ill by society. And likewise, Brown, in 1995, found that when women felt they were trapped and had to stay in and clean the house and raise the children, they were more likely to experience mental illness. Since the American Psychiatric Association Disorder and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders has been published, a lot more people are being diagnosed as mentally ill. So this is really important to understand what mental illness actually is. Monitoring mental health has become a lot easier since these things have been published. There are many problems with labelling and diagnosing the mentally ill. Now I'm going to move on to the stigma surrounding mental illness. For example, we begin to perceive the behaviour as sick rather than something to understand. Society rarely asks why someone has become mentally ill. They only focus on the negative impact of the mental illness. It also gives public agencies the right to incarcerate. It allows the mentally ill to see themselves as rule breakers and undesirable. And this is, I have a degree in psychology, and in psychology language this is known as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So people will say you're a rule breaker, so you actually become a rule breaker, like you internalise the stigma that surrounds you. Social construction has resulted in society seeing people as being mentally ill rather than having a mental health issue. Yeah? People are schizophrenic. They're not normal people with a schizophrenic problem society just labels them as schizophrenic. By labelling someone as mentally ill, they foster dysfunctional coping styles which reduce the person's self-esteem. If a mentally ill person internalises the label put on them, they can create a self-stigma. They will believe what they are actually being labelled. All this can contribute to a low self-concept. Labelling people also encourages mental health to become a taboo subject. Like if you listen to the newspapers, like a schizophrenic is always a crazed killer or a mass murderer or evil. You know, the mentally ill expect rejection and feel shame and self-loathing. This in turn could lead the mentally ill to isolating themselves from society. So in this sense, it means stigma is probably worse than the mental illness in itself. Labelling and stigma also affect the mentally ill's chances of getting a job. Health insurance policies discriminate between the mentally ill and the physically ill. Being labelled as mentally ill can actually cause more mental illness because the people may act more defensive and be less confident, which could altogether lead to them avoiding social interactions completely. So then again, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You always think of the mentally ill person as someone that doesn't socialise, is deviant from normal behaviour, and they're only doing this because of the stigma that they've received because of their mental illness. Yen et al. In 2005 found that a quarter of depressed patients suffer from high self-stigma, and they found that the higher the self-stigma, the more intense their depression. But seeing I've done quite a bit of research on this, I found both sides to the argument. So believe it or not, there are some benefits of mental illness being stigmatised. For example, accepting the label could foster self-acceptance, which may cause one to seek treatment and help the person understand their own illness. Young et al. In 2002 found that people with previously undiagnosed ADHD felt relieved and even joy at their diagnosis. When the mentally ill receive a diagnosis, it may become a relief